here today, in spite of what I said last week. But next week I will be gone. Okay, I'll be at Disney. My family is taking me there, whether I like it or not. So, anyway, welcome to our weekly Bible study, and today we're going to be going through chapter 18 of Deuteronomy. It's a rehash of some of the things that we've read before in the Pentateuch. As you study the Pentateuch, you're going to see that there are themes that recur over and over again. They are slightly different from each other. So you'll find that there are different accounts that might clash with each other. But that's to be expected because they didn't have an historian compiling all of this and saying, hey, that doesn't fit, hey, that doesn't fit. Okay, these are documents that were prepared at different times during Israel's history. And the time that Deuteronomy was prepared was prior to the Babylonian captivity, which makes it unusual because it's kind of like the first book of the Pentateuch is at the end. So let's take a look at chapter 18. Privileges of priests and Levites. Now, understand, in the previous part of Deuteronomy, the Levites were not priests. You had the Aaronic priesthood, and the Levites were the worker bees that were working for the priests. So now they are referred to as Levitical priests. So apparently something has changed from the time of the Exodus and the priesthood under Aaron to now the priesthood under the Levites. And one of the reasons why this is the case is that people couldn't just up and go to Jerusalem all the time for sacrifices, and there were festivals that they had in their own towns and stuff. Who's going to be performing the sacrifices in these little towns and cities and stuff that are scattered all over what became the kingdom of Israel? And so you have Levites, and it's something like what we find in the United Methodist Church. In the United Methodist Church, you can have an unordained pastor who performs the sacraments in their own parish. Okay? They're not authorized to perform sacraments in other parishes, although the Levites were. But if you're not an ordained pastor in the United Methodist Church, you can perform all the sacraments and offices associated with pastoral ministry in the parish to which you are appointed. Now, that makes us a little bit different from most other Protestant churches. Okay? Anyway, these are Levitical priests. The whole tribe of Levi shall have no allotment or inheritance within Israel. They may eat the sacrifices that are the Lord's portion, but they shall have no inheritance among the other members of the community. The Lord is their inheritance as he promised them. You'll notice that the sacrifices are part of the compensation. Okay? So we're not talking money, we're talking when a Levitical priest performs a sacrifice, he gets to eat it. So you have, rather than the sacrifice being totally consumed by fire, depending on the cook, it was functionally a way of supporting the Levitical priesthood. This shall be the priest's due from the people, from those offering a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep. They shall give to the priest the shoulder, the two jowls, and the stomach. Why the stomach? Why was that a big deal, getting the stomach? Don't know. Okay, well, the stomach was a big deal because that's what they made their wine flasks out of, was the stomach. So it wasn't so much that they're going to eat the stomach, it's that this is what they used to store the wine and the oil and things like that. Okay, well, you use what you got. Okay, it was really hard to find these in ancient Israel.
It's hard
Here's
to
to you.
find. It's real hard to find one of these.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so they got the stomach.
Didn't have
The first fruits of your grain, your wine, and your oil. See, how do you store that stuff? As well as the first of the fleece of your sheep, you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen Levi out of all your tribes to stand in ministry. Okay, so the Levites are, they're not just the people who perform ceremonies. The Levites are the enforcers of the law. They are the judges, and in many cases they are the juries as well. They are, like for instance, if the elders of the city come to a decision or fail to come to a decision, they're going to leave it in the hands of the Levite. The Levite is the one who teaches the law. The Levite is the one who keeps the population literate, teaches the men, especially the boys, how to read and write, so that they can read and write the scriptures, or they can read the scriptures. Back then they weren't scriptures, they were, the writings, the scrolls. So the Levites are the ones who maintain civic order and religious order within the communities. The Levites are also connected. So the Levites form a network that the high priest in Jerusalem can use to monitor what's going on in the countryside. Okay? So if there is a particular tribe or region or city or town that doesn't seem to be measuring up, a report can come back from the Levites to the high priest, and there is, as we'll just see, a method of enforcing what's going on. Okay, so in verse 6, if a Levite leaves any of your towns from wherever he has been residing in Israel and comes to the place that the Lord will choose, and he may come whenever he wishes, okay, then he may minister in the name of the Lord his God, like all of his fellow Levites who stand to minister before the Lord. They shall have equal portions to eat, even though they have income from the sale of family possessions. What is this about a Levite up and leaves his town and goes to another town, and as soon as he hits the other town, the people in that town have the responsibility of supporting him equally with the Levite that is already there? Okay? So what happens when we have an issue in the church? Who shows up?
The devil.
Well, first, the devil, yes. Okay. Man, have I seen that. I don't know why we don't include him in our attendance record, because definitely there in some of the churches I've had. Who? The DS shows up. The district superintendent shows up, okay? And when the district superintendent shows up, we're not responsible for supporting the district superintendent any more than we normally do with our apportionment giving. But he's the guy who comes in to see, or woman who comes in to see what's going on and how do we deal with the issue that this church is having. The people in the town might be having an issue with a particular Levite. This particular Levite might be scamming them and maybe asking for more than what the Levite is due. Or the Levite in the town might have given a report on some pagan activity in the town that he's not able to control. They bring in another Levite. Okay? So what you're seeing is a way that the system is back-checking and lending an enforcement aspect, so that, if you have a Levite in a town who just isn't up to the job, or if, sometimes the job can get too big for one guy, they'll bring in another Levite. But if they have to bring in another Levite, you're not going to dock his pay. He's going to get paid the same as the Levite who's in the town.
Now, is the other Levite, is he asked to come to that?
It doesn't say what the reason is. It says that the Levite can go wherever the Levite wants. It's up to the Levite, and according to this, it's up to the Levite whether he stays or goes from the community where he is. Okay? the Levite has the option of choosing, according to this, choosing what community they reside in. Okay? But if you have more than one Levite in your town, okay, which is kind of interesting because the sacrifices are already set. So you already have these offerings that you're going to do on a seasonal basis or on an occasional basis, depending on, the holiday or whatever. And they're already there to provide for a Levite and the Levite's family. And now you have another one show up, and you're supposed to give that Levite the same as the other Levite, but the schedule for sacrifices and the amount that goes into sacrifices doesn't change. So I can see a flaw in the system. Okay? Now, once you have an institution like this, especially, now understand the Levites they are the highest authority. Wherever they are, they're the highest authority, okay? And it's not that easy to ride herd on them. So, from my standpoint, just thinking the way governments and churches operate, this is a system that has potential flaws in it, depending on the character of the person who's been appointed to that position. It would be really easy for a Levite to threaten somebody with a bad judgment, to get a bribe or to do stuff like this, because you didn't have the accounting system that we've got now. I think before another Levite comes to your town, something really egregious has had to happen. But by and large, on a small scale level, there are plenty of ways that a Levite could manipulate the system if they were not ethical. Okay? And understand also that these people are Levites not because of the quality of their character or the competency of their skills. They are Levites because their daddy was a Levite and his daddy before him was a Levite. See where this is going? Okay. So there are some flaws here. You don't really have the checks and balances. The only hint that you have that there might be checks and balances is that another Levite could show up for whatever reason. According to this, at that Levite's personal discretion.
How about if they disagree?
Huh?
How about if the Levites disagree?
Well, then there had to be some system of appeal back to the head priest, the high priest, back in Jerusalem. There had to be some way to resolve that, because they talk about if people can't get to a conclusion on something, it gets referred to the high priest. So that's like their Supreme Court. There are some checks and balances. They're not specified too well in here. Okay? And understand that the Levites are not just a tribe, they are also a class. And if you have a class that has certain protections, watch out. So this system has issues. If you want to see an example of how this thing can transpire, just take a look at Jesus coming in and cleansing the temple. Because it's this kind of corruption that he was addressing. Okay, child sacrifice and magic is prohibited. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you must not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. No one shall be found among you who makes a son or daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is a soothsayer, or an augurer, which I don't know what that is, or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or who consults with spirits, or who seeks oracles from the dead. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord. It is because of such abhorrent practices that the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You must remain completely loyal to the Lord your God, although these nations that are you are about to dispossess do give heed to soothsayers and diviners. As for you, the Lord your God does not permit you to do so. All right, what are they talking about? They're talking about a very common practice in pagan societies where a firstborn son or daughter is sacrificed in order to ensure future fertility in the family. It's a horrible practice. This is one of the things that the Jewish community specifies as human sacrifice is not allowed in the Old Testament. Well, human sacrifice, from the standpoint of a ceremony like this, is prohibited within ancient Judaism. But in ancient Judaism, if they captured a town full of pagans and those people were dedicated to the Lord, they were specifically sacrificed as a way of preventing God's wrath falling onto the people of God. So
This
there was,
contradicts earlier in the Bible where it says, when you go into the land, you kill all the people.
yes. Yeah, evidently,
Contradiction.
there's still some of them folks around doing stuff they're not supposed to do. All right? These prohibitions, excuse me, these prohibitions are not as specifically addressed in the New Testament. What you find in the New Testament are evidences of demonic possession. But how that demonic possession came about is not really specified. What brought that demonic possession into a person? And in the Old Testament, there was an understanding that if you practice these kinds of things, you were inviting evil into the community.
Do you believe there's demonic possession today?
Yes, I do, because I've engaged it. So yeah, I've seen it. It is not common. Okay, and just because you don't like somebody or they start acting weird doesn't mean that they're possessed. Okay, there are people. I think there are people who are prone to evil without actually being possessed. I would look at Stalin, Hitler, people like that who are strongly influenced by evil. And there is an aspect of the occult involved in most of those personalities. But you have people who are, self-declared atheists who do not believe in anything spiritual, like Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. Hitler did believe in deities, and they were pagan deities. They were old Teutonic deities. So he was a declared pagan. But as far as demonic possession of an individual, we have accounts of it in the New Testament, and I don't doubt that they occurred. And it wasn't just mental health, and it wasn't. There are obviously things where people misconstrued it, like there's epilepsy, things that you can explain medically, but there are some things that you don't explain medically, like how do you get demons from a person into a herd of swine? So there's a dialogue going on with an entity that is not the person. So yeah, those things they do happen, and they do happen today. And if you go into societies that are more prone to a pagan outlook, you'll find that it's not uncommon. but it's less common here, but I've seen it. So, and I spent I majored in psychology, and I worked in mental hospitals. I worked with people with all kinds of mental illnesses, and they were nothing like what I saw. So it's different. There are things here, though, that did not enhance Israel's technological development. And this is true for Western society as well. Today, it is nothing at all for us to have a new discovery, a technological, scientific discovery, and we just say, "Well, that was a scientific discovery," and wonderful. They're starting to learn some of the secrets of creation when they do that. And we don't condemn scientists for being scientists, but because of these kinds of prohibitions where people did not understand. Remember, everything had some kind of either divine or demonic origin. Okay, a lot of superstitions and things that persisted in Western society way up until, right now. There are still people who are very superstitious. And as I've said, I think it's very unlucky to be superstitious, so I'm not. But so we've had, like during the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, if somebody was practicing medicine, they might be considered a witch. Because the person wasn't asking God to do the healing, they were finding some mechanical, herbal something that made the person feel better. So a person who was practicing healthcare was very often accused of being a witch. Sometimes you don't like your doctor and you want to get a second opinion. Back then they would just burn you at the stake. This really impeded the technological development of Israel, because if you take a look at the Philistines were very advanced. These were people who had migrated from the Aegean. They were in touch with all kinds of societies and all kinds of technologies. And they brought those into their community. The Philistines were much, we say somebody's a Philistine like they're some backwoods nothing. But it was really the Israelites who were. Because, like for instance, in metallurgy, someone who worked as a smith and combined metals, like copper and brass, or tin and copper, and came up with bronze. Somebody who was able to mix metals like that, they considered that to be a magical skill. And these smiths had a special tattoo that they had, and it was considered to be a religious thing for them to be able to make more advanced metals. So the Israelites very often found themselves behind the curve when they came up against Philistines in terms of weaponry and things like that. If they wanted to get a plow, they had to go to the Philistines. If they wanted to get a sword, they'd have to go to the Philistines or kill one in order to get it. They didn't have the capacity to manufacture these things themselves. You'll notice that even in the Pentateuch, it says mixing metals together is a sin. Mixing meats together is a sin. Anytime you mix something, if you mixed wool and flax together, that was a sin. Anytime you combine things that were not normally naturally part of the way the thing grew, that was considered a sin,
Now,
not kosher.
are these rules by God or are these rules by man? That you shouldn't mix.
They claim that they are by God. Okay, but people wrote it down. Just saying. Okay, now we mix things all the time. You know, we do a lot of genetic engineering now, and we're getting better at it than maybe we should. But there are things going on now. You know, I just got a call from a very dear friend who is a widow of a district superintendent, and she just had a heart valve replacement. It's a pig valve. Oh, that's not kosher, you know. I don't know if I can sit down at the retirees dinner with her anymore. But you know, those kinds of things were considered sins back then. Today we consider them technology. And we don't look at science as witchcraft anymore. You know, we don't threaten people who come up with a new telescope with burning at the stake if they don't destroy the thing. So at the same time they're trying to keep evil out of their community, they are also keeping technology out of their community.
We'd say that they were backwards.
No, I don't say they were backwards because they're not in the 21st century.
And still aren't.
But people today that are like that,
Yeah.
to me, I would say they're backwards.
Well, you know, if we're going to be literalists about these kinds of prohibitions, we need to really be more specific about what is demonic and what isn't. What is pagan and what isn't. Science is not paganism. Okay? But astrology is. Astronomy is not. Astrology is. Back then they wouldn't have made a differentiation.
Say that again. Astrology is.
Is pagan. Astronomy is not. Astronomy is science.
Okay. I'm confused.
And when you see that the science doesn't match up with what the Bible says, then we go crazy. Okay?
Astrology is.
So, you know, there are people who say, you know, the earth is only so old because God created it and he did it in 7 days. And how can we see in a telescope stars that we're just getting light from billions of years ago, if that was the case? You know, there's a conflict in the narrative. And what they used to do, what some people still do, is to go to the biblical narrative rather than the scientific narrative. But the Bible is not a science journal because there was no science when they wrote it. People didn't have an understanding of their environment the way we do today. So what they wrote made perfect sense from what they could see. And they were, because of these restrictions, also very suspicious of anybody who decided to study these things and come up with maybe an alternative narrative. So I think it's important for us to keep on coming up with alternative narratives. I don't think God is afraid of the truth. I think these people were writing in the context of what they knew and how their society operated, and it made perfect sense to them at the time. And there are things that make perfect sense to us today that don't make any sense at all. Okay? So you take a look at, you know, even what's going on in California now. I mean, stuff that made perfect sense was considered nonsensical. And there are consequences for that. But, you know, and I've seen it, I mean, coming out of the military is really hidebound. They really are. And some of the things that are cutting edge, we just kind of creep into, you know, because of, you know, we haven't done it that way before, or tactical thinking hasn't caught up to the technology. You know, I think actually in all of military history, Desert Storm was really the first time when the technology and the tactics merged for us. We've always been behind the curve. You know, when they came up with rifled muskets before the Civil War, where the tactics had been based on smoothbore muskets. The tactics didn't catch up until almost the end of the war. So, we get hidebound about stuff too. And every once in a while, there's a breakthrough. We get smarter, but, anyway, that's where we are. We're going to pick it up at verse 15 next time I show up. And this has to do with a prophet like Moses. And it's kind of, go ahead and read that. It's not really very specific about who that prophet is going to be. But people have made suppositions about who that prophet is supposed to be. And, we'll go from there. But anyway, thank you for being with us, and see you in a while. Okay. God bless.
Thank you.
This.